Odysseus waited until the thunderous footsteps had died away in the distance. He then took a long pole that was leaning against the wall of the cave. "This is the weapon we're going to use to defeat the Cyclops," he said. As he explained the plan to his companions, he used his sword to cut a long piece off of the pole. He sharpened it to a point and held the sharpened end into the fire to harden it. He then hid the finished weapon at the back of the cave, ready for when the Cyclops returned. It was evening before they heard his terrible feet coming back. Thud, thud, thud. The stone was dragged away from the mouth of the cave, and in came the sheep. The Cyclops lumbered after them, pulling the stone back into place behind him. Page 38. The evening went the same way as the one before. The Cyclops milked his sheep and swilled down 2 bucketfuls of milk. Then he grabbed 2 sailors for his supper, crunching their bones as he chewed them up. It was a horrific sight, but Odysseus and the rest of his companions forced themselves to stay quiet. Soon they would have their revenge. When the Cyclops had finished eating, he settled himself down beside the fire. That was the moment Odysseus had been waiting for. Filling a drinking bowl with the strong wine he'd brought from the ship, he stepped forward and held it up to the Cyclops. "I've brought this as a gift," he said, "hoping for your help. But I can see that you're too wild and savage to appreciate good wine." The Cyclops snatched the bowl out of his hands and drank the wine in a single gulp. Then he rolled his single glaring eye and held out the bowl. "More," he growled, "and when you've poured it, tell me your name. I have a gift for you, too." Odysseus smiled, but he didn't speak. Not yet. He just filled the bowl again, and then again after that, and again. The Cyclops went on guzzling the wine, not realizing how strong it was. Gradually, his speech slurred and his eyes glazed over. When he was totally drunk, Odysseus spoke at last. "You asked for my name. I'll tell you. I'm called Nobody. Now, where's the gift you promised me?" The Cyclops rolled his eye and bellowed in laughter. "Here it is. I promised you all your companions before I eat you. Isn't that a fine gift? I'll save you for last." He roared with laughter again and then slumped over on his back. In less than a minute, he was snoring drunkenly. As soon as he was unconscious, Odysseus ran to the back of the cave to fetch the pole he had sharpened. Once again, he and his men plunged it into the fire. But this time, they held it there until it was red hot. When it was just about to burst into flames, they lifted it out and raised it higher. They drove it with all their strength into the Cyclops' one enormous eye. Page 40. He awoke with a scream, knocking them out of the way as he jumped to his feet. And he went on screaming as he struggled to pull the stake out of his eye. The noise awoke every other Cyclops on the hillside, and they all came racing down from their homes, shaking the ground like an earthquake. "What's the matter, Polyphemus?" they yelled. "Why are you shouting like that? Who's in the cave with you?" "Nobody," Polyphemus shouted. "Nobody's here." The other giants were baffled. "Has someone hurt you?" they yelled. "Do you want revenge?" "Nobody has hurt me," Polyphemus bellowed. "I want revenge on nobody." "Then why are you making such a fuss?" the others shouted angrily. "Be quiet and let us go to sleep." They stomped away from the hill, leaving Polyphemus blundering around the cave in agony. The worse the pain grew, the more he wanted revenge. When morning came, he rolled the stone away from the mouth of the cave to let the sheep go out to pasture. But he was determined not to let his enemies escape. Sitting down in the entrance, he stretched out his great arms, running them over the ground to make sure that only the sheep got past him. The soldiers looked desperately at one another. What could they do now? If they tried to sneak out with the sheep, they were sure to be caught. But Odysseus had thought of that. He made another plan. While it was still dark, he tied the Cyclops' great sheep together in threes, knotting willow twigs into their thick, curly wool. Now, without making a sound, he showed his men in sign language how to cling on underneath the middle sheep. Once they were up, he tied them securely into place. As soon as he let the sheep go, they trotted toward the mouth of the cave. Polyphemus ran his hands over their backs and around their feet, searching for the sailors. But the men were hidden in the thick wool and protected by sheep on each side, and he didn't find them. One by one, they were carried out of the cave until only Odysseus was left. All the sheep had gone now, except for the big ram that led the flock. Jumping up underneath it, Odysseus clung to its fleece. He twisted his arms and legs into the wool as the animal trotted towards Polyphemus. "Oh, my ram," Polyphemus said when he felt its horns. "Why are you last instead of leading the way? What's the matter with you?" He kept the ram in front of him, running his hands over it. Page 44. Underneath, Odysseus held his breath as the thick fingers came towards him. They were just about to touch his shoulder when Polyphemus stopped and let out a great sigh. "You stayed because you're sad, didn't you, dear ram?" he said. "You know I've been hurt. If I could find nobody, that treacherous weakling, I would beat his brains out. Oh, if only you could tell me where he is." For a second he paused, almost as though he expected the ram to speak. Then he let it go as he trotted out of the cave. Odysseus loosened his cramped hands and jumped down. Quickly, he untied his men, and they all raced toward their ship, herding the fat sheep with them. It would have been the perfect escape, if only Odysseus had kept his mouth shut. But he didn't. As the ship left the shore, he ran to the stern and yelled triumphantly at Polyphemus. "So, I'm a treacherous weakling, am I, Cyclops? Well, this weakling has defeated you and given you the punishment you deserve." The Cyclops heard his voice and charged toward the sea with a roar. Heaving a great rock out of the ground, he flung it into the sea, aiming toward the sound. A splash set the ship rocking, and the sailors pleaded with Odysseus to be quiet, but he wouldn't stop shouting. Page 45. Do you want to know who's clever enough to trick you?" he yelled at Polyphemus. "Well, you can tell your friends that it wasn't nobody. It was Odysseus, king of Ithaca." The Cyclops bellowed and lifted up his massive hands, calling out to the god Poseidon, who was his father. "Father Poseidon, grant me revenge. Stop Odysseus from reaching his home in Ithaca. Or if he must reach home, let it be only after a long journey. Let him lose all of his companions and his ships and arrive in Ithaca like a wretch to find his home full of trouble." The sea swelled and thundered, boiling around Odysseus' ship. His men pulled at their oars, desperate to return to the island where they had left their comrades in the other 11 ships. They were terrified of being wrecked before they could reach it. By morning, they were there, and everything was calm. The sea slapped softly on the beach under a clear sky. It seemed that Polyphemus' curse had dissolved like a puff of wind. But it hadn't. Deep under the river of ocean, Poseidon, the earth shaker, had heard the voice of his son. Rearing up his mighty head, he scanned the wine-dark sea until he found Odysseus and his tiny fleet of 12 strong ships. Shaking the tangled locks of his hair, Poseidon began to watch them.